The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Willow Creek as Samuel Lawson rode into town, his worn leather boots caked with the dirt of 1,000 miles traveled. It was the spring of 1878, and after 5 years of driving cattle across the Western Territories, he had finally returned to the place where his heart had remained, though he had tried desperately to forget. Samuel dismounted his chestnut mare outside the town's only saloon, his tall frame and broad shoulders marking him immediately as a man who had lived his life beneath the open sky. At 30 years old, his face bore the weathered lines of someone who had seen both beauty and brutality in equal measure. "Samuel Lawson, as I live and breathe," called a familiar voice. Samuel turned to see William Cooper, the town's aging blacksmith, approaching with a wide grin splitting his gray-bearded face. "Hello, old friend," Samuel replied, extending his hand. "The year's been good to you?" "Good enough," William answered, clasping Samuel's hand firmly. "Though I reckon not as interesting as yours. Heard you've been driving herds clear to Montana Territory." Samuel nodded, his eyes drifting down the main street. "Work's work. Keeps a man moving. Some might say running," William muttered, then caught himself. "The Anderson place is still standing, if that's what you're wondering." The mention of that name sent a jolt through Samuel's chest. "Wasn't asking. Weren't saying you were." William cleared his throat. "Though you should know, things have changed since you left." Samuel secured his horse to the hitching post. "Things always do." "Julia's been running that farm herself these past years," William continued, ignoring Samuel's attempts at indifference. "After her father passed 2 winters back." Samuel paused, his hand resting on his saddle. "Thomas died. Pneumonia took him. Julia's been managing on her own. Stubborn as ever, that one." Samuel's jaw tightened. "I'm sorry to hear about Thomas. He was a good man." "Better than most," William agreed. "Though he never did forgive you for leaving his daughter the way you did." Samuel removed his saddlebags with more force than necessary. "I didn't come back to dig up old graves, William." "Then why did you come back?" It was a fair question, one Samuel had asked himself repeatedly during the long journey to Willow Creek. "Time to settle," he finally said, though the words felt hollow. "Can't ride the trail forever." William studied him for a long moment. "Well, you picked an interesting time to return. Town's changing. Railroads coming through next year. New folks arriving every month." Samuel glanced down the street at the freshly painted storefronts that hadn't existed when he left. "I noticed." "You planning to stay at the boarding house?" "For now," Samuel replied. "Until I figure what comes next." William nodded. "Mrs. Peterson still runs it. She'll be pleased to see you. Always had a soft spot for strays." Samuel managed a small smile. "Some things don't change, at least." As William turned to leave, he paused. "One more thing you ought to know, Samuel. About Julia." But Samuel raised a hand. "Whatever it is, William, it's been 5 years. Water under the bridge." The blacksmith shook his head slowly. "Some bridges don't wash away so easy, son." With that cryptic remark, he walked away, leaving Samuel with an unsettled feeling in the pit of his stomach. After securing a room at the boarding house, Samuel spent the day reacquainting himself with the town. Willow Creek had grown considerably in his absence. The general store had expanded, a proper doctor's office now stood where once only a traveling physician had occasionally visited, and the saloon had been renovated with a fresh coat of paint and new signage. As dusk fell, Samuel found himself nursing a whiskey at the bar, trying to ignore the occasional glances from townsfolk who recognized the prodigal cowboy who had once been expected to marry the Anderson girl. "Didn't think we'd see you back in these parts," said the bartender, a new face Samuel didn't recognize. "Just passing through," Samuel lied, not ready to commit to the truth, even to himself. "Funny way to pass through," came a female voice from behind him. "Considering Willow Creek ain't on the way to nowhere." Samuel turned to find Madeline Cooper, William's daughter, standing with her arms crossed. Now in her mid-20s, she had grown from the teenage girl he remembered into a confident woman. "Hello, Madeline," he said, tipping his hat. "You're looking well." "And you're looking like you're hiding," she replied bluntly. "Pa said you were back." Told him he must have been seeing things. Samuel gestured to the empty stool beside him. "Care to join me?" "No," she said firmly. "I came to deliver a message, not to socialize." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "A message. Julia knows you're back." News travels fast in Willow Creek, same as it always did. Samuel swallowed hard. "I wasn't hiding from her." Madeline's expression softened slightly. "Maybe not intentionally, but she deserves better than to bump into you unexpectedly at the general store." "What would you suggest?" "She's at the farm. Same place she's always been." Madeline turned to leave, then added, "She'll be expecting you tomorrow. Don't make her wait any longer than she already has." Before Samuel could respond, Madeline disappeared through the saloon doors, leaving him with his half-empty glass and a weight of anticipation that threatened to crush him. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Samuel saddled his mare early, before most of the town was stirring. The familiar trail to the Anderson farm wound through stands of cottonwoods and across the small creek that gave the town its name. With each hoofbeat, memories flooded back of stolen moments beneath those very trees, of promises made beside that gurgling water, of a future imagined but never realized. The Anderson farmhouse appeared much as Samuel remembered, a modest two-story wooden structure with a wide front porch and shuttered windows. But the surrounding land had changed. New fencing enclosed expanded fields, a larger barn stood where the old one had been, and several outbuildings had been added. Signs of prosperity, of hard work and determination. As Samuel approached, he spotted a figure moving between the barn and the house. Even at a distance, he would know Julia Anderson anywhere. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a practical braid, her slender frame moving with purpose as she carried a basket of what appeared to be eggs. Samuel's throat went dry. He slowed his horse to a walk, giving himself a few more precious seconds to prepare for what would inevitably be a difficult conversation. Julia looked up at the sound of approaching hooves. She paused, setting her basket down carefully on the porch step. Even from 30 yards away, Samuel could see the tension that straightened her spine and squared her shoulders. "Good morning, Julia," he called, his voice sounding foreign to his own ears. "Samuel," she replied, her tone giving nothing away. He dismounted, securing his horse to the hitching post near the water trough. As he approached, he finally got a clear view of her face. At 27, Julia was more beautiful than he remembered. The softness of youth had given way to the defined elegance of a woman who knew her own mind. Her green eyes, once so open and trusting, now regarded him with guarded caution. "Your farm looks good," he said, gesturing to the well-maintained property. "You've done well for yourself." "Did you come all this way to comment on my farming abilities?" she asked, one eyebrow arched. Samuel removed his hat, twisting it nervously in his hands. "No, Madeline said you wanted to see me." "Did she now?" Julia crossed her arms. "And what exactly did Madeline tell you?" "Just that. That you knew I was back, and that you'd be expecting me today." A flicker of something annoyance, perhaps, crossed Julia's face. Madeline has always had a flair for the dramatic. "I simply mentioned that if you had the courage to show your face here, I wouldn't turn the shotgun on you immediately." Despite everything, Samuel found himself smiling. "That sounds more like the Julia I remember." "I'm not the girl you remember, Samuel," she said sharply. "That girl died waiting for a letter that never came." The smile faded from his face. "I deserve that." "You deserve a lot more than that," she replied, but there was more weariness than anger in her voice. She sighed, looking toward the horizon. "Why are you here, Samuel? After all this time?" He wished he had a better answer. I couldn't stay away any longer. 5 years, she said quietly. 5 years without a word. I wrote, he admitted. Dozens of letters. Never sent a single one. Julia's gaze returned to him, surprise evident in her expression. Why not? Because I didn't deserve to disrupt your life after I left the way I did. Because I was too proud to admit I'd made a mistake.
Because.
He trailed off, struggling to articulate the complex tangle of reasons that had kept him away. Because you're a fool, she finished for him, but there was no malice in her tone. That about sums it up, he agreed. A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with 5 years of unspoken words. Would you like some coffee? Julia finally asked, gesturing toward the house. It's fresh. Samuel nodded, relief flooding through him at this small olive branch. I'd like that very much. As they climbed the porch steps, Julia paused to retrieve her basket of eggs. The screen door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing a cozy interior that Samuel remembered well. The main room served as both kitchen and sitting area, with a sturdy wooden table at its center and a stone fireplace along one wall. It was tidier than it had been during Thomas Anderson's time, with feminine touches evident in the curtains and carefully arranged shelves. Please sit, Julia said, indicating the table as she moved to the cast-iron stove where a coffee pot simmered. Samuel removed his hat and took a seat, his eyes following her movements. There was something different about her beyond the natural changes of time. A new confidence in her bearing, a sense of self-possession that hadn't been there before. Your father would be proud of what you've done with the place, he said as she placed a steaming mug before him. A sad smile touched her lips. He fought me on every change until the end. But yes, I think he would be. Julia took the seat across from him, cradling her own mug. So, you've been driving cattle? Samuel nodded. Up and down the territories. Montana, Wyoming, Colorado. Wherever the work was. Sounds lonely. It was. He met her gaze directly. I won't pretend otherwise. Julia studied him over the rim of her mug. You could have come back sooner. I wasn't ready. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. I left because I was afraid, Julia. Afraid I couldn't be the man you needed. Afraid I'd fail at being a husband and end up like my own father. Julia's expression softened slightly. I never asked you to be perfect, Samuel. I only asked for honesty. I know that now. He took a sip of coffee, the familiar bitter taste grounding him. I've spent 5 years learning what I should have known all along. A noise from upstairs, so faint Samuel almost missed it, drew his attention. A creak of floorboards, the soft sound of movement. Julia's eyes flicked upward, then back to Samuel. Something in her posture changed, a new tension entering her shoulders. There's something I need to tell you, she began, but was interrupted by the distinct sound of small footsteps on the stairs. Samuel turned toward the sound. A child appeared at the bottom of the staircase, a little girl with chestnut hair tumbling in loose curls around a heart-shaped face. She wore a simple cotton dress and clutched a well-loved rag doll to her chest. Most striking were her eyes, a familiar deep blue that Samuel saw each morning in his own reflection. The little girl, who couldn't be more than 4 years old, looked between the two adults with curious eyes. Mama, she called hesitantly. Samuel's world tilted on its axis. His gaze flew to Julia, who was watching him with an unreadable expression. Come here, sweetheart, Julia said gently. The little girl approached cautiously, her eyes never leaving Samuel. Sarah, this is Mr. Lawson, Julia said, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. He's an old friend of mine. Sarah regarded Samuel with the frank curiosity only children possess. You have a horse, she stated, having clearly spotted his mare through the window. I do, Samuel managed, his voice rough with emotion. Her name is Penny. I like horses, Sarah declared. Mama says I can have one when I'm bigger. Sarah, Julia interrupted gently. Would you please go gather the eggs from the back coop? I forgot those ones this morning. The little girl nodded seriously. I can do it myself. I'm a big girl. You are, Julia agreed, brushing a hand over her daughter's curls. But be careful. And don't forget your basket. Once Sarah had taken a small basket from a hook by the door and disappeared outside, Samuel found his voice again. Julia, he began, hardly knowing what to say. She's 4 years old, Julia said quietly, answering the unspoken question. Born the winter after you left. Samuel's hands gripped the edge of the table.
Why didn't you?
How could you not tell me? Tell you what, Samuel? Julia's voice held a hint of the anger she'd been suppressing. You disappeared. No forwarding address. No way to reach you. Should I have sent a notice to every cattle drive between here and Canada? Someone could have found me. William didn't know where you were either. Julia cut him off. No one did. You made sure of that. Samuel ran a hand through his hair, his mind reeling. I have a daughter, he whispered, the reality of it beginning to sink in. Yes, Julia said simply. You do. Does she know? About me? Julia sighed. She knows her father was a cowboy who had to go away. That's all. She's never asked for more than that. Samuel felt a surge of emotions too complex to name. Anger at having been kept in the dark, shame at knowing it was his own actions that had caused it, and above all, an overwhelming sense of loss for the years he could never reclaim. I need to know her, he said, his voice low but determined. I need to be part of her life. Julia studied him, wariness evident in her gaze. You've been back in town one day, Samuel. How do I know you won't disappear again when things get difficult? Sarah doesn't need someone who comes and goes from her life on a whim. It wasn't a whim that took me away, Samuel protested. And it's not a whim that brought me back. I came back for you, Julia, to try to make things right between us. Finding out about Sarah. It changes everything and nothing. I still want what I came for. And what exactly is that? A chance, he said simply. A chance to prove I'm not the same man who left. Julia's expression remained guarded. That's a lot to ask after 5 years of silence. I know, he admitted, but I'm asking anyway. Before Julia could respond, the screen door banged open and Sarah reappeared, her small basket containing 3 eggs. Mama, she announced proudly. I found them all by myself. Well done, sweetheart, Julia said, her face transforming with a mother's pride. Careful now. Bring them to the counter. Samuel watched the interaction with hungry eyes, cataloging every detail of his daughter's appearance and mannerisms. The way she bit her lower lip in concentration as she carefully transferred the eggs. The slight dimple in her left cheek when she smiled. The determined set of her small shoulders. Once the eggs were safely delivered, Sarah turned her attention back to Samuel. Do you work with the cows like Mr. Cooper? She asked. I do, Samuel replied, his voice gentle. I help move them from place to place, so they have good grass to eat. Sarah nodded, accepting this information. Mama and I have 4 cows. And chickens. And 2 pigs named Spot and Daisy. That sounds like quite a farm, Samuel said, fighting to keep his emotions in check. It is, Sarah agreed seriously. Mama says we have the best milk in the whole territory. Julia rose from her chair. Sarah, why don't you go play with your dolls while I finish talking with Mr. Lawson? Can I show him Charlotte? Sarah asked, holding up her rag doll. Julia hesitated, then nodded. Quickly, then upstairs. Sarah approached Samuel, proudly displaying her doll. This is Charlotte. She's my best friend. Mama made her for my birthday. Samuel looked at the lovingly crafted doll, noting the careful stitching and the tiny details. Julia had included button eyes, embroidered mouth, even little boots made from scraps of leather. She's beautiful, he said sincerely. Your mama is very talented. She makes the best things, Sarah agreed. Do you have dolls? Samuel smiled. No, but I have a horse. Maybe sometime you could meet her properly. Sarah's eyes lit up. Really? Today? Julia intervened. Not today, Sarah. Mr. Lawson was just leaving. Samuel glanced at Julia, recognizing the dismissal. He stood, placing his hat back on his head. Another time, perhaps, he said to Sarah. It was very nice to meet you. Nice to meet you too, Sarah replied politely, then scampered up the stairs, Charlotte the doll clutched tightly in her arms. Once they heard her footsteps overhead, Julia led Samuel to the door. I appreciate you not saying anything, she said quietly. She's too young to understand. What happens now? Samuel asked, pausing on the threshold. Julia's expression was conflicted. I don't know, Samuel. This isn't simple. I want to be in her life, Julia. In both your lives, if you'll let me. You can't just appear and expect everything to fall into place, she said, frustration evident in her tone. There are consequences to your choices. I know that, he replied, and I'll accept whatever terms you set. But please, don't shut me out completely. Julia was silent for a long moment, her gaze drifting to the fields beyond. I need time to think, she finally said. This wasn't how I planned to tell you. How did you plan to tell me? A small, sad smile touched her lips. I hadn't gotten that far. I wasn't sure you'd ever come back. But I did, Samuel said softly. You did, she acknowledged. Come back in 3 days. We'll talk then. It wasn't what Samuel had hoped for, but it was more than he deserved. 3 days, he agreed. Thank you, Julia. As he mounted Penny and rode away from the farm, Samuel felt as though his heart would burst from his chest. A daughter. He had a daughter with chestnut hair and blue eyes who liked horses and carried a doll named Charlotte. The knowledge was overwhelming, terrifying, and wonderful all at once. The 3 days that followed were among the longest of Samuel's life. He spent them making arrangements in town, securing work at the livery stable, and fending off curious questions from townsfolk who wondered what had brought the wandering cowboy back to Willow Creek. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Samuel cleaned up as best he could at the boarding house, donned his least-worn shirt, and rode once more to the Anderson farm, his heart in his throat. This time, Julia was waiting for him on the porch. Sarah was nowhere to be seen. She's at the Coopers', Julia explained as Samuel approached. Madeline offered to watch her for a few hours. Samuel nodded, relieved to have the opportunity to speak freely. Have you decided? He asked, not bothering with pleasantries. Julia gestured to the pair of rocking chairs on the porch. Let's sit. Once they were settled, Julia turned to face him fully. I've been thinking about what's best for Sarah, she began. And for me. Samuel waited, hardly daring to breathe. You're her father, Julia continued. Nothing changes that. She deserves to know you, and you deserve to know her. But I can't allow her to get attached to someone who might leave again. I won't leave, Samuel said firmly. You say that now. But what happens when the life of a stable hand in a small town becomes too confining? When the open trail calls to you again? It won't, he insisted. Julia, I spent 5 years trying to outrun my feelings for you. It didn't work. I'm done running. She studied him, searching his face for signs of insincerity. I want to believe that. Then give me the chance to prove it, he urged. Let me show you both that I can be the man you need me to be. Julia sighed, her gaze drifting to the horizon. I've worked so hard to build a stable life for Sarah. For myself. We have a routine. A place in this community. I'm not asking you to change any of that, Samuel said. I just want to be part of it. It's not that simple, Julia replied. People talk, Samuel. They always have. If you suddenly start spending time with us, there will be gossip. Let them gossip, he said dismissively. It doesn't matter what people say. It matters to me, Julia countered. And it will matter to Sarah when she's old enough to understand. I won't have her labeled as. She trailed off, unable to say the words. Samuel leaned forward in his chair. Marry me, then. Julia's eyes widened. What? Marry me, he repeated. It's what we should have done 5 years ago. What I should have had the courage to do then. Samuel, you can't just propose after being back in town for 4 days. Why not? We already have a child together. We loved each other once. And you think that's enough? Julia shook her head in disbelief. Marriage isn't something you rush into because it's convenient. Samuel reached for her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. I'm not proposing because it's convenient. I'm proposing because I never stopped loving you, Julia. Even when I was 1,000 miles away, even when I tried to convince myself I could forget you, I couldn't. You're in my blood. Her expression softened slightly, but she still withdrew her hand. Love isn't always enough, Samuel. Trust matters too. And you broke my trust once before. I know, he acknowledged, and I'll spend the rest of my life earning it back if that's what it takes. Julia was silent for a long moment, considering. I'm not ready to marry you, she finally said. But I am willing to let you spend time with Sarah, to get to know her, and perhaps to see if there's anything left between us worth rebuilding. It wasn't everything Samuel had hoped for, but it was a beginning. Thank you, he said sincerely. When can I see her? Sunday, Julia decided. Come for dinner after church. We can tell her then who you really are. Samuel nodded, a knot forming in his throat at the thought of being formally introduced to his daughter. What will you tell her? The truth, Julia said simply, in terms she can understand. That you're her father, that you've been away, and that you've come back to get to know her. And us. Samuel asked quietly. What are we? Julia's expression was guarded, but not cold. We're two people with a complicated past and a child we both love. Beyond that, we'll have to see. It was enough for now, Samuel decided. It had to be. The days until Sunday crawled by. Samuel threw himself into his work at the livery, impressing the owner with his strong back and knowledge of horses. He rented a small cabin on the edge of town, determined to establish roots in Willow Creek. And he purchased a gift for Sarah, a small wooden horse he'd found at the general store, lovingly carved and painted. When Sunday finally arrived, Samuel attended the town church for the first time in over 5 years. He sat in the back pew, aware of the curious glances and whispers that accompanied his presence. Julia and Sarah sat near the front, both dressed in their Sunday best. Throughout the service, Samuel found his attention drawn repeatedly to his daughter's small form, to the way she fidgeted during the sermon and leaned against her mother's side. After the final hymn, Samuel waited outside, nervously shifting his weight from foot to foot as congregants filtered out of the building. Several nodded in his direction or offered brief greetings, but most gave him a wide berth, unsure what to make of the returned cowboy. Julia emerged last, holding Sarah's hand. She spotted Samuel immediately and guided her daughter toward him. Good morning, she greeted him, formal but not unfriendly. We'll see you at 1 o'clock? Samuel nodded. I'll be there. Sarah looked up at him with curious eyes. Are you coming to our house for dinner? She asked. I am, Samuel confirmed, smiling down at her. I'm looking forward to it. Mama made a pie, Sarah informed him seriously. Apple. It's my favorite. Mine too, Samuel replied, and was rewarded with a small, shy smile that made his heart swell. As Julia led Sarah away, Samuel caught William Cooper watching the interaction with thoughtful eyes. The blacksmith approached once Julia and Sarah had gone. Treading carefully, I hope, William said by way of greeting. As carefully as I can, Samuel assured him. William nodded. Julia's been through enough. So has that little girl. I know, Samuel said quietly. I'm trying to do right by them both. See that you do, William replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. Julia's like a daughter to me since her father passed. And that child. He shook his head. She deserves better than a father who disappears when things get difficult. Samuel met the older man's gaze squarely. I agree. And I intend to prove I can be the father she deserves. William studied him for a long moment, then offered a grudging nod. I suppose time will tell. At precisely 1 o'clock, Samuel knocked on the door of the Anderson farmhouse, the wooden horse wrapped in brown paper tucked under his arm. Julia answered, wearing a simple but flattering blue dress, her hair arranged in a softer style than he had seen previously. Come in, she said, stepping aside. Dinner's almost ready. Samuel entered, his senses immediately filled with the tantalizing aroma of roast chicken and fresh bread. The table was set with Julia's best dishes, the ones that had belonged to her mother and were only used for special occasions. It smells wonderful, he said sincerely. Thank you, Julia replied, a touch of color in her cheeks. Sarah's in the front room. Samuel followed Julia to find Sarah sitting on the floor with her doll, Charlotte, arranging what appeared to be a tea party with imaginary guests. Sarah, Julia said gently. Mr. Lawson is here. The little girl looked up and smiled. Hello, she greeted him. Charlotte says hello too. Samuel knelt down to be at her level. Hello to both of you. I brought something for you, Sarah. He held out the wrapped package. Sarah looked to her mother for permission before accepting it. For me? She asked, eyes wide. Open it, Samuel encouraged her. With careful fingers, Sarah unwrapped the paper to reveal the wooden horse. Oh, she gasped, delight spreading across her face. It's a horse. Like yours. Not quite as big, Samuel said with a smile, but just as special. Thank you. Sarah clutched the toy to her chest. I'll name her Penny, like your horse. Samuel felt a lump form in his throat. That's a perfect name. Julia touched his shoulder, a silent signal. He stood, understanding that the moment had come. Sarah, Julia began, sitting down on the sofa and patting the space beside her. There's something important I need to tell you about Mr. Lawson. Sarah looked up, clutching her new wooden horse in one hand and Charlotte in the other. She dutifully climbed onto the sofa beside her mother. You remember how I told you that your father was a cowboy who had to go away? Julia asked gently. Sarah nodded. Because he had important work with the cows. That's right, Julia continued, her voice steady despite the emotion Samuel could see in her eyes. Well, Mr. Lawson. Samuel. Is your father. He's come back to Willow Creek to see us. To see you. Sarah's blue eyes, so like his own, widened as she looked between the two adults. Really? She asked, her voice small. Samuel knelt before her once more. Really, he confirmed softly. I'm your father, Sarah. And I've been wanting to meet you for a very long time. Sarah tilted her head, studying him with the direct gaze of a child. Are you staying now? Or do you have to go away again for the cows? I'm staying, Samuel promised, his voice rough with emotion. I'm not going anywhere. Sarah considered this for a moment, then asked, Can I call you Papa? Like Mary Cooper calls her Papa? Samuel glanced at Julia, who nodded almost imperceptibly. I would like that very much, he told Sarah, his heart threatening to burst from his chest. Sarah slid off the sofa and approached Samuel, still clutching her toys. With the simple acceptance that only a child could offer, she threw her arms around his neck. I always wanted a papa, she whispered against his ear. Samuel's arms encircled her small frame, holding her close for the first time. Over Sarah's shoulder, he caught Julia's gaze. Tears shimmered in her green eyes as she watched father and daughter embrace. I'm here now, Samuel murmured, as much to Julia as to Sarah. And I'm never leaving again. The dinner that followed was unlike any meal Samuel had experienced in 5 years of wandering. They ate at the table as a family, with Sarah chattering away about her friends, her animals, and the adventures of Charlotte the doll. Samuel drank in every word, committing to memory the sound of his daughter's voice, the way her hands moved expressively as she spoke, the light that shone in her eyes. Julia was quieter, watching the interaction between father and daughter with a mixture of emotions playing across her face: joy, wariness, hope, and traces of old pain not yet fully healed. After the meal, Sarah insisted on showing Samuel every corner of the farm. Hand in hand, they visited the barn to see the cows and pigs, the chicken coop where Sarah had gathered eggs, and the small vegetable garden that provided much of their food. "And this is my special tree," Sarah announced, pointing to an old apple tree at the edge of the property. "Mama says it was here when she was little too." Samuel smiled, remembering. "Your mama and I used to sit under this tree sometimes." "You did?" Sarah looked between them with interest. "We did," Julia confirmed, having followed them on their tour. "A long time ago." "Were you friends?" Sarah asked innocently. Julia's eyes met Samuel's over their daughter's head. "We were very good friends," she said carefully. "The best of friends," Samuel added softly. As the afternoon light began to fade, Julia announced it was time for Sarah's bath before bed. The little girl protested, not wanting her time with her newly discovered father to end. "Will you come back tomorrow?" she asked Samuel, her blue eyes pleading. Samuel looked to Julia, unwilling to overstep. "That's up to your mama," he said gently. Julia hesitated, then nodded. "Your father can come for supper again tomorrow if he'd like." "I'd like that very much," Samuel assured them both. After helping Sarah gather her toys, Samuel prepared to take his leave. At the door, Julia held back as Sarah gave him a fierce goodbye hug. "Good night, Papa," she said, the words still new and wonderful on her lips. "Good night, Sarah," he replied, dropping a kiss on her curly head. "Sleep well. I'll see you tomorrow." Once Julia had sent Sarah upstairs to prepare for her bath, she returned to the porch where Samuel waited. "Thank you," he said simply, "for today, for letting me know her." Julia wrapped her arms around herself, warding off the evening chill. "She took to you quickly," she observed. "I was worried she might be shy or uncertain." "Children are resilient," Samuel said. "More so than adults sometimes." Julia smiled faintly. "Yes, they are." Her expression grew more serious. "This doesn't fix everything, Samuel. There's still a lot we need to discuss. About the past. About the future." "I know," he acknowledged. "But it's a beginning." She nodded, then surprised him by reaching out to touch his arm. "For what it's worth, seeing you with her today. It was good. Better than I expected." It was the closest thing to forgiveness she had offered, and Samuel treasured it. "Thank you for giving me the chance to prove myself." "Don't make me regret it," she said quietly. "I won't," he promised. "Not this time." In the weeks that followed, Samuel established a routine that revolved around Sarah and Julia. He worked at the livery stable during the days, spent evenings at the Anderson farm whenever invited, and slowly began to integrate himself into the life of his daughter. With each passing day, Sarah grew more comfortable with him. She sought him out to share her discoveries, proudly showed him her growing collection of treasures: a robin's feather, a uniquely shaped stone, a wildflower pressed between the pages of her mother's Bible. She introduced him to each of her dolls and stuffed animals, explaining their personalities and histories with the earnest gravity only a child can muster. Julia watched their growing bond with cautious optimism. She maintained certain boundaries. Samuel was welcome for meals and afternoon visits, but always returned to his cabin in town at night. She was unfailingly polite, but kept her own emotions carefully guarded, allowing Samuel access to Sarah while holding her own heart in reserve. One evening in late spring, after Sarah had been tucked into bed, Julia invited Samuel to remain on the porch for a cup of coffee the first time she had extended his visit beyond their daughter's waking hours. "She asked me today if you were going to live with us someday," Julia said without preamble as she handed him a steaming mug. Samuel's hand stilled midway to his lips. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I didn't know," Julia replied honestly. "That these things take time." Samuel set his mug on the porch railing, gathering his courage. "And what do you think, Julia? Not just about what Sarah wants, but what you want." Julia sighed, gazing out at the darkening fields. "I don't know, Samuel. Some days I look at you with her, and it's everything I ever dreamed of. Other days, I remember waking up to find you gone without a goodbye, and I'm terrified of trusting you again." "I understand," he said quietly, "but I need you to know that I'm committed to being here. For Sarah, yes, but for you too. If you'll have me." Julia turned to face him fully. "Why did you really leave, Samuel? I need to understand." It was a question he had been expecting, one he had prepared for during countless sleepless nights. "I was afraid," he admitted. "My father abandoned my mother and me when I was 8 years old, left us with nothing but debts and broken promises. I grew up watching my mother work herself to the bone to keep us fed. When things got serious between us, when you started talking about marriage and a future, I panicked. I convinced myself I'd end up just like him, that I'd hurt you the way he hurt my mother. So instead, you chose to leave before you could fail," Julia said, understanding dawning in her eyes. Samuel nodded. "It was cowardly. The very act of running proved I was exactly what I feared." "What's different now?" Julia asked, the question that mattered most. "I am," Samuel said simply. 5 years of running taught me that you can't outrun yourself. Everywhere I went, everything I did, you were with me. The guilt of how I left. The regret of what I'd thrown away. When I heard about your father passing, something in me broke. I realized I'd been telling myself I left to spare you pain, when really I'd only been sparing myself the risk of failure." Julia was silent for a long moment, absorbing his words. "I waited for you," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For months after you left, I expected you to appear on the horizon. Even after I knew I was carrying Sarah, I kept thinking you'd somehow know, that you'd feel it and come back." The admission pierced Samuel's heart. "I'm so sorry, Julia. For all of it. For not being there when you needed me most." "I managed," she said, a hint of pride in her voice. "I had to. For her." "You did more than manage," Samuel said with admiration. "You built something remarkable here. You raised our daughter to be kind and bright and wonderful." A small smile touched Julia's lips. "She is wonderful, isn't she?" "She's perfect," Samuel agreed. "And that's because of you." Julia's eyes met his, something of the old warmth returning to her gaze. "Not entirely because of me. She has your stubbornness, your love of animals, your eyes." "Poor child," Samuel joked softly, and was rewarded with a genuine laugh from Julia, the first he'd heard since his return. The sound of it stirred something deep within him, a longing so intense it was almost painful. "I've missed that," he said. "Your laugh." Julia's expression grew serious once more. "I've missed many things." The admission hung between them in the gathering darkness, pregnant with possibility. "Julia," Samuel began, reaching for her hand. This time, she didn't pull away. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I'm asking anyway. Give us, you and me, another chance. Not just for Sarah's sake, but for our own." Julia looked down at their joined hands. "I'm not the same girl you left behind, Samuel. I'm stronger now, more cautious." "I wouldn't want you to be the same," he assured her. "I just want the chance to know the woman you've become, to see if we might still fit together somehow." Julia raised her eyes to his. "One step at a time," she said finally. That's all I can promise. One step at a time, Samuel agreed, hope blooming in his chest. As spring turned to summer, those steps gradually accumulated. Samuel began helping around the farm, mending fences, tending to the livestock, and expanding the vegetable garden. He built Sarah a swing from rope and a plank of wood, hanging it from the strongest branch of her special apple tree. In the evenings, he would push her higher and higher as she squealed with delight, while Julia watched from the porch, her expression softening day by day. The boundaries between them began to blur. Samuel stayed later in the evenings, sometimes sitting with Julia long after Sarah had gone to bed, talking about everything and nothing, the changes in town, the memories they shared, their hopes for their daughter's future. One warm July evening, as they sat together on the porch swing, Julia surprised him by resting her head against his shoulder. I forgive you, she said quietly, for leaving. I think I've forgiven you for some time now, but I needed to say the words. Samuel's arm tightened around her. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm grateful for it. It's not about deserving, Julia said thoughtfully. It's about choosing to move forward instead of staying trapped in the past. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the only sound the gentle creaking of the swing and the chorus of crickets in the fields. Samuel, Julia finally said, lifting her head to look at him. I think it's time you stopped riding back to town every night. His heart skipped a beat. What are you saying? I'm saying that Sarah asks every morning if her papa will be here for breakfast. I'm saying that this house has felt more like a home these past months than it has in years. I'm saying. She took a deep breath. I'm saying I'm ready for the next step. If you are. Samuel turned to face her fully. Julia Anderson, I have never been more ready for anything in my life. With gentle hands, he cupped her face and leaned forward, pressing his lips to hers in a kiss that held 5 years of longing, months of tentative rebuilding, and the promise of all that was to come. The following Sunday, Samuel and Julia stood before the congregation of Willow Creek's church, Sarah between them holding both their hands, as the minister pronounced them husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, the minister announced with a smile. Samuel looked down at Julia, radiant in a simple cream-colored dress adorned with lace at the collar and cuffs. Are you sure about this? He whispered, giving her one last chance to change her mind. Julia's answering smile was sure and steady. More sure than I've ever been. As their lips met to seal their vows, the church erupted in applause. Even William Cooper, who had been Samuel's most skeptical critic, stood with tears in his eyes, nodding his approval. Sarah tugged on the sleeve of her new dress, a miniature version of her mother's. Are we a real family now? She asked loudly enough for the entire front row to hear. Samuel lifted her into his arms. We've always been a real family, he told her. Now everyone else knows it too. The celebration that followed at the Anderson, now Lawson farm was a joyous affair. The entire town turned out to wish the newly formed family well, bringing dishes to share and gifts to commemorate the occasion. Sarah proudly introduced Samuel to everyone who would listen as my papa, a title he treasured above all others. As the sun began to set and the guests gradually departed, Samuel found Julia standing alone by the old apple tree, watching Sarah play with the Cooper children. Happy? He asked, slipping his arm around her waist. Very, she replied, leaning into his embrace. Though I'm also ready for our guests to go home. Samuel chuckled. Patience, Mrs. Lawson. They'll leave soon enough. Julia turned in his arms, her expression suddenly serious. I need to tell you something. A momentary flicker of concern crossed Samuel's face. What is it? Julia took his hand and placed it gently against her stomach. Sarah's been asking for a little brother or sister, she said, a smile spreading across her face. I think she's going to get her wish. Samuel stared at her in wonder. Are you certain? Julia nodded. The doctor confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to tell you tonight, when we were alone, but I couldn't wait. With a whoop of joy that startled nearby guests, Samuel lifted Julia off her feet and spun her in a circle. "Another child," he said in amazement as he set her down. "A brother or sister for Sarah." "A second chance for us," Julia added softly. "To do it right this time. Together." Samuel pressed his forehead to hers. "I promise you, Julia, I will be here for every moment. Every sleepless night, every first step, every scraped knee, and bedtime story." "I know you will," she said with perfect confidence. "That's why I married you." Later that night, after the last guest had departed and Sarah had been tucked into bed with Charlotte and her wooden horse, Samuel and Julia stood on the porch of their home, arms wrapped around each other as they gazed at the star-filled sky. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" Julia asked. "If you hadn't left? Or if you hadn't come back?" Samuel considered the question. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I look at what we have now, Sarah. This farm, you and me, the baby on the way, and I can't imagine any other path that would have led us here." Julia smiled up at him. "We took the long way around, that's for sure." "The scenic route," Samuel agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "But we made it home eventually." As they turned to enter the house together, their home, Samuel felt a profound sense of gratitude for second chances, for forgiveness freely given, and for the family he had nearly lost but had been blessed enough to find again. 2 years later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Julia stood at the edge of the expanded Lawson farm, watching as Samuel gave horseback riding lessons to Sarah, now 6, while their son Thomas, named for Julia's father, toddled after butterflies in the grass nearby. The farm had prospered under their joint care. With Samuel's labor and Julia's management, they had doubled their livestock, expanded their fields, and built a reputation for quality that brought buyers from as far away as Denver. The small cabin that had once belonged to Thomas Anderson's hired hand now housed William Cooper's nephew, who helped with the heavier work while learning the business of farming. Julia rested a hand on her swelling stomach, where their third child, another girl, she suspected grew stronger each day. As if sensing her gaze, Samuel looked up and smiled, the love in his eyes as clear and true as it had been on their wedding day. Sarah waved enthusiastically from atop her pony, a gift from Samuel on her 6th birthday, while little Thomas abandoned his butterfly chase to toddle toward his mother with outstretched arms. Julia lifted her son, pressing a kiss to his chubby cheek as she watched her husband and daughter continue their lesson. The journey that had brought them here had not been easy or straightforward, but as she surveyed the life they had built together, Julia couldn't imagine wanting anything different. Samuel guided Sarah's pony toward them, his face alight with the simple joy of being with his family. "How are my girls doing?" he called. "We're doing just fine," Julia replied, including their unborn daughter in her answer. Sarah slid from her pony with growing confidence. "Mama, Papa says I can help name the baby if it's a girl. Can I? Please?" Julia laughed. "We'll see, sweetheart. What names are you thinking of?" As Sarah launched into an elaborate explanation of her favorite names and why each would be perfect for her future sister, Samuel dismounted and moved to Julia's side, slipping an arm around her waist. "Happy?" he asked quietly, echoing the question he had asked on their wedding day. Julia leaned into his embrace, their family complete around them. "Perfectly," she answered, and knew it to be true.